Namanda butsu namanda butsu namanda butsu namanda butsu namanda butsu namanda butsu namanda butsu. Please join me in Gasho. Gasho onegaishimasu. Suppose there are parents with 7 children. When there is sickness among the 7 children, although the father and mother are concerned equally with all of them, nevertheless their hearts lean wholly toward the sick child. It is like this with the Tathagata. It is not that there is no equality among all sentient beings, but his heart leans wholly toward the person who has committed evil. Nammam dabutsu, nammam dabutsu, nammam dabutsu, nammam dabutsu. Hello, and thank you for joining us for our Buddhist Church of San Francisco Onko service, in which we remember the life of Shinran Shonin, the founder of our Jodo Shinshu Buddhist tradition. This Onko service is a service of expressing our gratitude. That's the meaning of these words, hon, and the word ko means gathering. So it's a gathering to express our gratitude and to reflect upon what we have received. We reflect upon what we have received from the wise teachings of Shinran Shonin and the boundless compassion of Amida Buddha that we receive each moment when we say these words, Namo Amida Butsu. When we think about gratitude, oftentimes we reflect on the very personal and intimate moments of our day-to-day life. For me these days, I continue to stay at home and spend lots of time with my family, as I'm sure some of you do. And I have 3 children now, and the youngest one just turned 2 this past week. So we have a lively household with a 9-year-old who's in 4th grade and a 7-year-old who's in 1st grade. They're doing their school from home. And then we have a toddler who's entering that very special stage of childhood where he's discovering his own opinions and his own attitudes. So things are lively around our house all week long. I once heard someone say that it was when they became a parent that they truly began to feel gratitude and appreciation, understanding for all that they had received when they were growing up. I used to think that this meant that when I became a parent, that I would feel that I was somehow able to give my children everything that my parents had given me, that I would have this same sense of bestowing upon my children that which I had received from my parents. However, having become a parent myself now 3 times over, I realized that what this insight means is that we come to appreciate that no matter how much we try to give and how much effort we make for our own children, that it pales in comparison to our feeling of gratitude for the kindness that we have received. So in our household, it's been very interesting for me to observe the relationships between my 3 sons. I'm an only child, so I didn't really experience much of sibling dynamics of my own growing up. But when I watch my children, it's very interesting to see how they grow and how they mature and how they relate with one another. I remember when our 2nd son was born, our oldest son was 2.5 at the time, and he was not particularly interested in this new baby in the household. He just seemed kind of in his own little world, as you know, we're reminded these days that 2-year-olds are kind of in their own little world. But my parents had come out to visit and to help out with the baby. And then as they were leaving, my mom was giving her 2nd grandson one last hug before she left. And they were kind of standing by the door. And my father was, bringing their suitcases out to the car. And in that moment, I saw that the older son saw my mom holding the baby, and he understood that Grandma and Grandpa were getting ready to leave, and he started to panic. He started to shout, "Baby brother, baby brother, baby brother," thinking that my mom was going to take the baby away. And so in that moment, I realized that he did have this sense of connection and love for his baby brother. And he's always been a very patient older brother. As his own brother, my second son, he came to be 2 years old. He would climb all over my oldest son while he was building Legos or folding some origami. And my oldest son was so patient. He would just carry on with what he was doing while his little brother was bouncing up and down on his back. And he would just carry on and carry on. And it's interesting now, as watching them as they get older, at one point, that patience begins to thin. That patience starts to thin out. And as the second brother became more and more assertive in himself, he would, get stronger and fight more. And he would really be the instigator of a lot of the household wrestling matches. And it's been so interesting to see now that he has become the older brother, how just in a moment his heart can change. One moment they'll be wrestling and he'll have his older brother in a headlock. He'll be pulling on his hair and he'll be punching him in the back. And I mean, these kids, they're really fighting. And I'll see them fighting and they're wrestling. And then all of a sudden, the 2-year-old now will wake up from a nap and he'll start crying. And one moment, the middle son will have in the headlock, I'm going to get you. Oh. And then he'll hear the crying, and he'll just drop everything, and he'll run to the crib. And he'll start to, try to entertain the baby and calm the baby down just like a switch. He goes from, being kind of the aggressor, the angry fighter, to the loving, compassionate, kind brother. And there's this kindness, this patience that awakens in our heart for those who are not as strong as we are, for those who are more vulnerable than us. And this is a kind of instinctive thing with us as human beings. And I see this in my sons, but I also see that it doesn't last forever. These days, when the second son attacks the older brother, then it becomes, a full-out brawl, and he's fighting back and pushing and all of these things, these natural, sibling rivalry and sibling, wrestling matches and so forth. And even the middle son, when he hears the younger son crying, the third son crying, he'll run and go to take care of him. But if he's worked long, spent a couple of hours building a really intricate Lego set, and then that baby brother comes and demolishes it, he's mad now, and he's shouting and screaming. So the human compassion is limited, right? It's not boundless for any of us, right? And so it is a Buddha who is truly able to exhibit this profound kindness and patience. It's not a switch that goes on and off for the Buddha. It's consistent. So this year, we're coming into the year of the ox. And as we come into this year of the ox, we had, of course, our Japanese and Western New Year. At the beginning of this month, we have the Lunar New Year, what's called the Chinese New Year, just around the corner. And so there's a story from the life of the Buddha that comes to mind for me around this time of year. It said that the Buddha, in a previous life, before he became enlightened, seated beneath the Bodhi tree, before he was born as Prince Siddhartha, that he was a bodhisattva once settled on the path to awakening, and that he lived in a forest. He lived in a forest as an ox, a kind, patient, but very strong and powerful ox. And it said that he had a companion in the forest who was a monkey. And the monkey was not a kind and loving and caring companion. He was a mischievous companion. He loved to cause problems for the ox. And the ox had been out wandering and working hard walking through the forest, and he would find a nice spot of grass and just get ready to settle down for a nice meal. The monkey would jump down on the grass and start dancing around on top of it, smashing it all down and getting in the ox's way so that he couldn't eat. Not only that, but the monkey would climb up upon the ox. He would swing back and forth from his horns like the tree branches. He would grab a stick and rub it on the ox's head. He would whack the ox in the back, saying, "I'm going to ride you like a bull," right? Causing all kinds of mischief, preventing the ox from having even a moment of peaceful rest throughout the day. Now it said one day a sprite, a forest spirit, came through, and he saw this monkey harassing, tormenting the ox. And he walked right up to the ox and said, "What is wrong with you? What's happening here? Did this monkey buy you? Did you lose a bet against this monkey? Could it be that you don't know your own strength? For you are the ox, the most powerful creature in this forest. Look at those sharp horns, hard as a diamond. They can cut through stone. Surely you could run right through that ox, right through that monkey. Teach him a lesson. Show him your own strength. Why do you tolerate this monkey?" And the ox said, "It's true. It's true that this monkey causes all kinds of problems and mischief. But rather than being annoyed with this monkey, indeed I feel gratitude for this monkey, for he gives me the opportunity to practice patience." You see, it's very easy to be patient with somebody who is stronger than you. It's very easy to be patient when someone's stronger than you and you can't fight back. But it's when someone is weaker than you and causes mischief, when you must exercise your own self-control, that is a precious opportunity to practice the Buddhist virtue of patience, right? And so the ox had this wise wisdom, and he said, "I know that if I wanted to live at peace and live comfortably, that harming others is not the way to bring about peace of mind for myself. Someday, someone perhaps will see this monkey and will set him straight. But in the meantime, I take this opportunity to practice patience with gratitude." It said that in the moment, the forest sprite was so moved by the wisdom of this ox who would go on to become the Buddha, that he made it very clear to the monkey that he was being very badly behaved and that he needed to change his ways. And the monkey then came to understand and appreciate the ox. So the ox had taught a wise lesson both to the forest sprite and in this way also to the monkey. So this is an expression of the compassion of a Buddha. The compassion of a Buddha. We aspire to that, but it's not easy for me. It's not easy for me to do that on my own. And so at this time, we look to the example of those who have come before us, who have received this wisdom, who have shown it in their life, in their way of living. So today, on this occasion of the onko service, we remember Shinran Shonin. Shinran Shonin, who received the wisdom of Amida Buddha, who knew his own limitations, and yet showed us the capacity of the Buddha's wisdom to transform our lives, to practice true patience and kindness. Shinran Shonin, as a young man, was a student of a teacher named Honen. And Shinran, along with Honen's other leading disciples, was sent into exile by those who were opposed to this teaching of Honen Shonin's, because it was revolutionary, teaching that all were equally included, all were embraced by the compassion of the Buddha, the good as well as the wicked. Indeed, it was the wicked who were the Buddha's primary concern. The object of the Buddha's deepest compassion were those who had lived a life of mistaken thinking, greed, anger, and ignorance. So Shinran carried this teaching in his heart. He He was sent into exile. He lived with his wife, Eshini, in her home territory of Echigo, what's now Niigata Prefecture. And this area was a farming area. And the family of Eshini were farmers. And so he was living with her, and he would have learned from her and from her family the practice of agriculture, how to farm. That's what they did. That's how they made their life. And he lived among the farmers, and he shared this Nembutsu teaching. Now, in time, he would have been allowed to return to Kyoto. The exile was lifted. He would have allowed to return, but he chose instead to join a community of farmers who were moving to the Kanto area, the area around what is now Tokyo. And at the time, that was a newly developing area, an area where a new capital was being built. And in that capital, more and more people were coming in, and they had figured out how to manage the land and to turn areas that had been wild swamps into cultivated rice paddies. And so what they needed were farmers to farm those rice paddies. And so many of those farmers traveled from areas like Echigo, where Shinran was living, where farming and the cultivation of rice was well developed. And these people who knew how to grow rice were needed in this other part of Japan. So they traveled from one country to another, because in those days, each province was in a way like its own country. And so they were traveling from one country to another, right? People who move in this way, we call them immigrants, right? So Shinran was part of this movement of immigrants, people moving from one area to another, right? Do you know anybody in your family who has come to this place, come to San Francisco or wherever you're watching our Dharma talk from today, from another part of the world? I think of my great-grandfather who, from Norway, traveled and settled in the Midwest, where I grew up. And so Shinran also, he moved into this new area. And when people move into a new area, sometimes they're welcomed for the skills that they bring, the contributions they make to the community. Other times people aren't really sure if they're ready to be welcoming or not. Shinran Shonin was a Buddhist teacher. He traveled with these people to support them and share the Dharma, in this newly developing area of Japan. And people, took one look at him dressed in his Buddhist robes, and they knew he was a Buddhist teacher. Right? Now, he was not the only Buddhist teacher in this area. There was a well-established teacher there by the name of Bennen. And Bennen, it said, had a following of 800 disciples. Right? And he had many people would go to Bennen and ask him to perform sacred rituals. They believed that Bennen had the power through his rituals. He was what was called a yamabushi, a monk who lived in the mountains and did difficult practices and had the power to do things like bring rain to parched crops, to bring about the healing of disease, to bring about good fortune in other matters. So people would go and they would ask Bennen for this support, and he would perform these rites, and in some cases, the desired outcome would be achieved. In other cases, it wouldn't, right? But it was those times, right, that it worked. It gave people hope and trust. And so when Shinran appeared, immediately people asked him, "What can you do? What are your special powers?" And Shinran Shonin said, "Well, I don't have any special powers." "Really? Well, what do you do? What do you teach?" He said, Oh, I teach. I hear Namo Amida Butsu. "Oh, Namo Amida Butsu. Does Namo Amida Butsu make it rain?" "No." "Does Namo Amida Butsu cure illness?" "No." "What does it do?" Shinran Shonin said, "Namo Amida Butsu is the voice of the Buddha, calling to us, assuring us that even if we go through difficult times where it doesn't rain, even if we experience illness, even if our lives come to an end, that There's no need for fear because we are embraced by the wisdom and compassion of the Buddha. It carries us through all of these difficult times. We can accept all of this as the truth taught by the Buddha, and we know that we will realize awakening through the guidance of the Buddha's wisdom and compassion. So whatever we face in this life, we can do so with peace of mind. This is not my power, but the power of the Buddha's primal vow. When people heard this teaching, of course, they were naturally drawn to this. And so as more and more people began to gather to hear Shinran's teaching, Bennen also began to hear about Shinran's teaching. And he wasn't particularly happy about it, right? Because all of these people who had been seeking his teachings now were going to Shinran Shonin. And so he began to feel that his territory was being threatened. And he made a plan. He said, okay, I'll find out where this Shinran travels, and I'll straighten things out with my bow and my arrow. Right? So he would go to Itajikiyama, where Shinran Shonin would often walk as he was traveling from place to place. And Bennen waited day after day along the paths of Itajikiyama with his bow and arrow ready to shoot Shinran Shonin with an arrow, right? But as he waited more and more, he didn't see Shinran. He would ask his followers, where does he travel? He said, oh, he travels on the path that goes around the east of the mountain. So Bennen would wait there. No Shinran. They say, where was he? Oh, he went around the west side of the mountain. So then Bennen would wait on the west. No Shinran. Where did he go? Oh, today he went on the east side. Bennen finally became so frustrated that he went right to Shinran's door, the door of his house, right? Pounded at the gate, shouted, Oi, Shinran! Come on out! Come on out! You know, I imagine Shinran walking out, opening up the door. Oh, hello. Hi, who are you? Bennen, the Yamabushi, animal skins, weaponry, sword, bow and arrow, right? Scary guy. Says, I'm Bennen. I'm here for you, Shinran. Shinran's other companions would have seen Bennen and just run, right? But Shinran, we're told he remained calm. He said, oh, welcome. What brings you here? I've come here to kill you, right? Threatening voice. Shinran said, oh, okay. So aren't you afraid? Shinran said, well, I leave the matters of life and death to Amida Buddha. But why don't you come inside? And I'd like to get to know you. Why don't we have a conversation? Would you like some tea? But, I'm here. Didn't you hear me? Didn't you hear me? Shinran said, I heard you. I'd like to hear more about you, right? He was open. He was trusting. He welcomed Bennen. Bennen said, what is this Nembutsu teaching that you teach? Shinran says, it's a teaching that everyone is welcome. No one is excluded. Everyone is welcome. No one is left out. Bennen says, what about me? I'm here for you. Do you welcome me too? Shinran said, no one is left out. Everyone is welcome. And in this moment, Bennen realized this man had no fear. This man had a broad, expansive heart that welcomed everyone, even those who came with ill intent, even those who came with aggression. So Bennen in that moment said, will you take me as your disciple? And Shinran said, I have not even one disciple. I have no disciples. But let us be friends and hear this Nembutsu teaching together. And so Bennen, in that moment, discarded his sword, discarded his weapons, and he came to be a companion of Shinran Shonin's, a fellow traveler in the Nembutsu, came to be one of Shinran's closest companions who traveled with him throughout the years on this journey of the Nembutsu. Right? And so Shinran Shonin, through his own life, he shows us in this episode that he has this vast heart, this heart that welcomes all, this heart we receive from from Amida Buddha in these words, Namo Amida Butsu. And so Ben came to be called Myohobo, marvelous Dharma. Right? He traveled with Shinran. They journeyed together, the Nembutsu, and they rejoiced in this teaching of the Buddha who cares for each of us, concerned for each of us with the concern of a parent toward the sick child. And so today, in our tumultuous times, as we hear this teaching of the Nembutsu, we reflect upon Shinran Shonin, who shows us how to live this teaching, even if we're an unenlightened being, because Shinran Shonin himself said, I'm not an enlightened being, but he sets an example for us of how a life is completely transformed, how we too can receive this great peace of mind in the Nembutsu. So I'm deeply grateful to all of you for joining us, taking part in today's onko service, where we hear these words, Namo Amida Butsu. Take comfort in the welcoming embrace of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. So in conclusion, I invite you to join me and let us together hear the comforting call of Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Nam Mang Da Butsu, Nam Mang Da Butsu, Nam Mang Da Butsu, Nam Mang Da Butsu.